It may or may not surprise you that as women rise in their career, they tend to have a tougher time leveling up than their male counterparts. Women do great in school, graduate at higher rates than men, and have high GPAs. But when we enter the workforce, we lose our edge. My guest today is here to explain why that continues to happen and what we can do about it. Kweilin Ellingrud is McKinsey and Company's Chief Diversity Officer and Director of the McKinsey Global Institute. She is the co-author of the book, The Broken Rung, When the Career Ladder Breaks for Women and How They Can Succeed in Spite of It. She joins me now with some actionable tips for women in the workplace.
Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 10, 9, going live. 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Kweilin, how are you? Thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure.
So this is a conversation I feel like we've been having. So I'm really curious about your data points and what you say we can do about it. I'm also very interested to know when you go in to work with some of these companies and some of the clients, individual women, men, how you mentally prepare, what your mindset is, and what goes through your mind before you meet with these people.
What goes through my mind is this is such a hard challenge to solve, right? It's been decades in the making, centuries in the making, if you will. And so to solve this issue will take a really concerted effort over a very long period of time. And so is this client ready? Is this leadership team ready to kind of stay focused, execute honestly like they would any other business initiative, right? When you tackle diversity and inclusion and you don't do it with the right resources, with the right accountability, with the right success metrics, with the right course correction, if you're not having the impact that you want, then it's kind of silly to expect, incredible results, because we wouldn't do that if it were a business problem. And this is fundamentally a business problem.
And what kind of response do you get?
A bit of, we have focused on this over time, but we haven't always kept the plot in good times and bad. And so it's really hard to kind of keep focused on this over 10, 20, 30 years, which is the concerted effort that we need to see to make really steady progress in the right direction.
And let's just start with defining broken rung. We're not talking about glass ceiling. You're saying broken rung. So define that, and then what's the difference?
Absolutely. Broken Rung is that first promotion to manager. So you're at the entry level. And frankly, at the talent pyramid, 70% of employees are at the bottom of that talent pyramid at the entry level. And everybody needs to make it through that first broken rung. The broken rung is in quantitative terms. For every 100 men who are promoted to that first manager role, 81 women are. So there's 19 missing women managers, and it's even more stark for women of color. So for every 100 men, 64 Latino women and 54 Black women get promoted. So almost half the promotion rate for Black women.
Has that changed over years? Has that improved, gotten worse? Where are we?
It has ebbed and flowed. Some years it's gone a little bit up. Others, it's been a little bit down, but for 10 years straight, where we've been doing women in the workplace benchmarking, it's been pretty steady.
Wow. And what do you attribute that to?
I attribute that to a lot of different things. It's interesting because actually women excel academically, right? In the United States, we get 59% of college degrees, where 70% of valedictorians have higher average GPAs, are the majorities of masters and PhDs as well. So academically, we're excelling. It's just once we enter the workplace, we kind of lose ground. And frankly, we lose ground at this first promotion to manager, but even before we are having kids or, some of these other challenges are coming into play. And so what do I attribute that to? I attribute that to a challenging kind of system and ecosystem that doesn't recognize talent equally. I attribute that to the motherhood bias, which we'll get into in a little bit, versus the fatherhood bonus. And I also attribute that to different rates of building what we call experience capital. And experience capital is that knowledge, wisdom, experience that you learn on the job. And women build experience capital at lower rates than men, because for every 10 years that men are in the workplace, women are in the workplace around 8.6 years, because we take more breaks and longer breaks, typically around child rearing years. And so we're actually working less and getting less experience, and also getting paid less for that experience.
Okay, so that's a challenge right there. And is that
It
happening?
is a huge challenge.
Is that happening in that lower rung already?
It's happening across the board. And, we see in the US data, there is a 27-cent pay gap. About 80% of that pay gap is explainable. We know why it's happening, which means 20% is not explainable, right? We don't have the variables or the data to measure it, or perhaps it's bias. But the 80% we can explain comes from two sources. 2/3 of it is the occupational choices that women make. So we might choose a job for more flexibility. We might choose a job that's less overtly competitive, like we get out of sales, for example, or out of the power alley is one of the terms we talk about. But we make just different kind of occupational choices. So when women jump jobs, they're more likely to either stay at the same pay or decrease their income quintile. When men jump jobs, they're much more likely to increase their income quintile. So that's 2/3 of the explainable gap. The other 2/3 of the explainable gap is that experience capital. We're not working for as much time. We have the more breaks and the longer breaks around those child rearing years, but also later to take care of parents, take care of in-laws, right? Women in the United States do about twice as much unpaid care work as men. Around the world, we do 3 times as much unpaid care work as men. In India, we do about 10 times as much unpaid care work as men. And so we're doing more work outside of our kind of professional capacity, which makes it harder also to balance work and responsibilities within our professional capacity.
So when you're meeting with the companies that want to make a change, are they valuing that? How do they handle that unpaid stuff? And do they value it? Do they want to compensate women for it? Is there a change in attitude?
I think it's more of a recognition that it does happen.
Yeah.
I don't think they certainly want to compensate women for it. Sometimes it is a barrier where they need to understand what is happening. For example, providing childcare or childcare flexibility
okay.
and options
Yeah.
so that more women can enter the workplace.
Right.
Or maybe they're in the workplace, but they're part-time and they want to shift to full-time. So those are challenges, particularly during COVID and post-COVID, that I think more employers have started to explore. But it's more of a recognition. And what we see in the data is that there's actually quite a bit of bias against mothers. So when you compare a woman with children to a woman without children, a woman with children is much less likely to get the job, much less likely to get promoted. Now, the reverse is true for men. There's a fatherhood bonus. When you compare men with children to men without children, men with children are more likely to get the job, more likely to get promoted, more likely to get paid highly, and the impact goes up the more children the man has. So we're penalizing mothers for having children and being perhaps too active parents, and we are giving benefits or kind of, when you dig underneath and kind of ask why kind of these fathers are getting higher pay, they're viewed as more stable, more trustworthy, more likely to stay with the company. Perhaps they need more income to kind of provide for their children, but the same is not, true or viewed in the same way for women.
So are you seeing, and maybe you don't have this information, but then are women aware of it? And are you seeing more women say, okay, either I'm not going to tell you about my family, or I'm just simply not going to have a family, or I'm going to wait to have a family? Are you seeing any of those things?
I think women are increasingly aware of it. I do know a number of women in competitive jobs, even in kind of raising funds for their entrepreneurial endeavors, who will hide their pregnancy until the very last moment, or completely if they can. and other women kind of making different choices of, maybe I will delay having kids until I'm in a more flexible place or have more options, or perhaps, as you described, not have children at all. So
Mm-hmm.
we have seen the birth rate or the fertility rate for women around the world in developed countries drop dramatically, right? First, it
Yeah.
was in Asia, South Korea, Japan, then China. Now we're actually seeing that across the US and Europe for a while now. As well as other countries, even India, the birth rate has dropped pretty dramatically.
Can you go back for a second to the experience capital? And if there is a delay or a differentiation, how do women catch up to that? What kinds of things can they do?
Absolutely. So experience capital, and those gaps, in fact, how individuals can build experience capital faster is the whole focus of the book, right? How do we as individuals take action, make different decisions so that we are keeping our experience capital learning curve steep
Mm-hmm.
and keeping it, steep at each pivot point across a career? And so, what can women do? The number one thing women and men can do is actually pick the right company. When you
Mm.
pick the right company, that's correlated with 50% higher lifetime income. And the right company does three things. Number one, it invests in your learning and development. And that could be a percentage of time, 20% of your time, 10% of your time, or a strong training culture or training programs. Second, it focuses on cross functional rotations. So you're not going to start in finance and end there 35 years later. You will rotate around. Maybe you start in finance, you go into the business, you come back to HR, right? But you're learning the industry from different perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
and you're building your skills in that experience capital and stretching yourself over time. And third, great companies will also have a clear strategy. And you can usually tell that even outside in based on how they're performing relative to their competitors. So those three factors, if you can look outside, but even before you accept an
Yeah.
offer, those are the kinds of companies that build leaders that are going to stretch your experience capital
Mm-hmm.
really well. And ideally, you pick a company like that early on in your career, because then you have your entire career to benefit from those skills.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
that is the number one thing that you can do. I would say a second thing, would be getting into the power alley and getting experience there.
Right. What is the power alley?
So, the power alley is what some might call staying close to the cash register in a company
Mm.
or an industry. How does your company make money? And if you can get into the power alley and learn how your company and how your industry does that, even for 2, 3 years, that will help you across an entire career. So just over a third of men start in the power alley, just under a third of women do, and it's correlated with 20% higher lifetime income. But just getting that experience is critical to your trajectory.
And can you explain what some of those jobs are in the power alley?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a power alley, let's say in a tech firm, would be in product development, product management. In a law firm, it would be being a lawyer. In most companies, it's in sales or distribution, right? How do you kind of create revenue? In a consulting firm, it would be being a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, how do you sell and make money? And what is the specific function or group that does that? That is the power alley of your organization.
And in those same examples, what are jobs that are not in the power alley?
So interestingly, being in tech, but in a law firm is not in the power alley, right? Being in tech in a tech firm is the power alley. So a support function would
Okay.
not be in the power alley because you're supporting other groups. You're supporting the primary group that's out there doing sales or, customer development, for example.
So I feel like what I'm hearing you say is you almost want to skip the first piece of an entry level job. So does that mean more education? Because you can't go in to a law firm unless as a lawyer in that role unless you've gone to law school.
Mhm.
So yeah, I feel like we're skipping kind of that entry level position.
I mean, everybody has to get that first promotion to manager,
Yeah.
but you bring up a great point. So this experience capital is actually roughly 50-50. So around the world, roughly half of your lifetime income is from experience capital, the wisdom and
Mm-hmm.
experience you build on the job. The other half is from your education and the characteristics you bring to your first job.
Mm.
So if you think about that 50-50, it will differ by person. It will differ by occupation. So your example of a lawyer, doctor, engineer, right? Jobs where it requires quite a bit of education to even get that first job in
Mhm.
the occupation. In those occupations, more of your lifetime income on average will come from your education. Versus if you're a plumber or a waitress, more of your lifetime income will come from experience capital.
Mhm.
Can I learn how to be a manager of other plumbers or start my own business in this space? That will determine more of lifetime income.
And does that change, or let me see if I can figure out how to phrase this question to capture what I'm thinking, is does that change early in your career, later in your career? In other words, if you're someone who has a lot of education and you want to make
Mhm.
a change later in your career, does that help more than the experience? So you used plumber, server. Do you know what I'm asking? I'm asking sort of like,
I do.
okay, good.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
I think what you're describing, Alita, is what we call big, bold moves.
Okay.
When you make a job jump and you're really stretching yourself to learn new skills. So I described kind of the average arc, right,
Yeah.
of your lifetime income. What we see is that women and men, on average, make the same number of what we call big, bold moves. And a bold move is something that really stretches your skills. You are not sure of what you're doing because you haven't done it before. And we measured the average, what we call skill distance of a job jump. So at that number is 25%. When you take on a new role, 25% of the skills that you use in that new job are not skills that you used in your old job. So 25% is the average. Anything higher than 25%, 30, 40, 50% new skills, that is a bold move. When you make a bold move, that is when you are building your experience capital at the
Mm-hmm.
highest rate. And
Mm,
that is a wonderful stretch for your lifetime income, right? Because you're
right.
growing in new ways. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but if you can frame it in a positive way of, I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm stretching myself, this is really healthy for me. It's
Mm-hmm.
probably the best thing I can do for my experience capital. That's a great thing. And what we saw in the data, interestingly, is that women and men do the same number of bold moves, roughly
Oh,
1.7
okay.
per decade. And that was encouraging. But what is different between women and men is when women do a bold move, they're more likely to either stay at the same income or decrease their income quintile. And men are much more likely to make a bold move and increase their income quintile.
Oh,
And now, if
wow.
you do that knowingly, right, let's say you're trading off salary for more
Right.
flexibility because you've got more unpaid care work at home, or if you're trading it off for a job that's more aligned to your values, wonderful.
Right.
But we also see in the data some of the things that we saw, for example, in nursing over the last few decades. Nursing used to be male dominated. And as nursing became more female dominated, average salaries came down. I think there's other examples with teaching and other
Mm-hmm.
occupations where we haven't seen kind of occupational pay stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so making the right trade-offs for you is going to be critical. And when you do make a bold move, make it count or at least trade off for things that are important for you.
Right. So the bold move can be something that you're saying 25% sort of a learning curve. That's considered
Exactly.
a bold move. But you could more, but women are making bold moves that sometimes are lateral or for other reasons, not necessarily increasing their kind of, not
Hey,
necessarily climbing the ladder. Um,
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
interesting. Wow. Okay. All right. Um, it also makes me wonder, should women just go and work for themselves? Should they become entrepreneurs more than sticking with a company? Any
We
research on
have
that?
seen a number of, yeah, women do that, right? Of, I don't want to work in a place where the rules are set by somebody else because I
Yeah.
don't like the way the rules are set and I don't feel like it's an equal playing field. So women have been going out to be their own entrepreneurs. Um, when they do so, the highest success rates are when they stick close to something they know well. So maybe they were in media and advertising and they
Right.
start a firm in that space, right? That in that case, bold moves are not recommended. Stay close to kind of what you know from your past world
Mm-hmm.
and start a business in that space. Unfortunately, when they do, those businesses tend to be under resourced in terms of bank loans. We know that only 2.3% of venture capital goes to women led businesses, up just a paltry number. Um, And so we know that they're underfunded, and women-led businesses are much more likely to employ only one person, the woman herself, much less likely to be kind of high-growth unicorns. And so how do we also kind of equalize the playing field, both on being full-time entrepreneurs, but also kind of funding through bank loans, through venture capital and higher growth funding sources as well, so that we're focusing on the right kind of growth trajectory.
Yeah. How do we do that? How do we do that?
It's an age-old problem.
Yeah.
I think both tackling the mix of the businesses we start, right? Women are more likely to start retail businesses, which have like a 50% failure rate. In fact, many banks don't even lend to those areas because of such the high failure rate, both retail, restaurants, et cetera. So we could shift the mix of those, as well as shift some of the bias that we see in terms of kind of lending, as well as venture capital investment.
Is it good to change jobs a lot? Is that helpful?
Within reason, right? Too much, and it's a bit of like, you never stick anywhere. Every 2-3 years, you're sort of jumping before you've actually built the skills, stretched yourself. Sometimes it takes somebody who knows you to make a bold move, which is where we talk about the multiplier effect or networking. And so I would say fewer moves. When you do make them count, right? Back to these bold moves and kind of strategically considered bold moves. So a few moves could be internal if you're in the right company and they have space and kind of new roles, could be outside your current company. Either one works, but strategically considered ones that are bold moves, stretching your skills, and ideally at some point in your first 10 years in that power alley, right, where your company and industry is making money.
Okay, I have a question for you for male versus female leaders. And if you are a manager or looking to get promoted, be a manager, is there any data that says you're going to have more success if you have a male boss versus a female boss, or the other way around, or is it equal?
I don't know on promotion rates. What we've seen in some of our women in the workplace data is that there's a broad distribution of female and male managers. On average, female managers are more likely, between 4 and 11 percentage points more likely, to support your learning goals, kind of give you a step-up opportunity, help you set boundaries and balance life and work. Frankly, things that, since COVID, we find are increasingly important. I would say, frankly, the rate at which both male and female managers do those things is far too low. I wish, both distributions were shifted up dramatically, but women managers on average do those things a bit more. So that is helpful. The other piece, though, is we found feedback for women and people of color is both, it's just less tough feedback is received. And that is from both male managers and female managers. And when we ask why, right, like you have both men and women on your team, you're clearly you're delivering the tough feedback to the men, but the women are not getting that same tough feedback. And when we dig underneath and ask why, the answer is typically around, I don't want to appear mean, and I'm afraid of an emotional reaction. I'm afraid of tears. And so if we as women are not getting that tough feedback of, Kweilin, here's what you need to learn to run the business or to get to the next level, then it's going to be really challenging to learn and grow, to build experience capital at that same rate.
I know you talk about AI in the book, and we have to talk about AI, right? Everyone's talking about it. Is that helpful to women? Not helpful to women? Not helpful.
On average, it is impacting women's jobs 50% more. So women are 50% more likely to have to switch jobs in the next 5 to 10 years because we are so concentrated in the shrinking jobs. Generative AI, but we also added demographic trends, which are shifting quickly, as well as consumption trends, partially as a result of those demographic trends. All of those things together are growing jobs, a few jobs pretty dramatically, and they're shrinking other jobs also pretty dramatically. And so to your question, women are concentrated in 3 of the 4 fastest shrinking occupations, which is why we're 50% more likely to have to switch occupations. So those 4 are customer service and sales, contact centers, right? We hear a lot about, digital kind of self-serve, like a lot of things going away with generative AI. Second is food service, waiters, waitresses, bartenders. The third is office services, so administrative assistants, receptionists. We need some, but far fewer than before. And women dominate those three occupational categories. The fourth shrinking category is production or manufacturing, which is more male dominated.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of concentration in the shrinking jobs. The growing jobs are healthcare, STEM, and transportation, including last mile delivery. So your Amazons, Ubers of the world. Women are concentrated in healthcare, not very much in STEM, and a bit more mixed in transportation.
Is there an equivalent for men to the broken rung?
I think it would be earlier on in education. So I've got three daughters, 12, 9,
Okay.
and 9. And I think in educational contexts, higher rates of ADHD, harder time with grades, persisting in college, even if they do get in.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the challenges are probably earlier on. Studying, attention span, focus, executive function kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they get into the workplace, we don't see the broken rung for men.
Yeah.
We do see it sometimes for men of color, but for white male colleagues, less so, at least on average.
Mm-hmm. What, we're talking about all the challenges that women have and what can they do then? What can we tell listeners who now feel like, oh, wow, that's a lot, which we knew, right? Where you're just giving us the specific data, but we've known that this has been a challenge for a long time. It continues to be a challenge, but what can we do today to help ourselves?
Absolutely. And Alita, you're right. It's easy to get depressed with the data. I think data and knowledge is power. So I would feel better knowing the facts around it. And then to your point, I think there's key points across a career. Early on in a career, I take comfort that we actually control a lot of this, right? You hope that your organization supports diversity and inclusion, but whether they do or not, there's so much that you can do in terms of your own decisions. Early on, I would pick the right company, number one. I would make calculated, strategic, bold moves and try to move up in income when I do so. And I would get experience in that power alley. At the margin, given our discussion around generative AI, I might choose those occupations that are growing, right? Not shrinking. And then across a career, let's say across sort of the middle of my career, I think there's a number of skills that each of us can build to future-proof our career. Things are changing so quickly with generative AI, as that we were discussing. I think networking is critical. Women tend to be over-mentored, actually people of color as well, over-mentored, under-sponsored. Lots of advice, lots of discussion. But when it really comes to creating opportunities that didn't exist before, that happens less frequently for women and people of color. And we really need to kind of equalize that through our networks. So women are more likely to have more narrow and more junior sponsorship networks. And because 70% of jobs are not even posted, if you don't kind of get to know what opportunities are out there through your network, you're at a systematic disadvantage. So how do we build those networks, activate them? And women we see in the research are more likely to be uncomfortable mixing their personal networks and their friendships with their work relationships. Sometimes we may start to doubt the foundation of that friendship if we're mixing it too much with work. Like, does she really like me for me? Or is this just convenient from a career perspective? Versus men are much more comfortable mixing the two, right? They have a beer, we play golf, and the deal is more likely to work out because they know each other and, oh, he's a good guy. So it'll be fine. And so while we're shooting ourselves in the foot from a networking perspective, I think men are really kind of using that synergy there. And so building networks across a career, building tech skills, not coding, but can you become a super user and understand the impact on your group? I think those are important skills, and social and emotional skills. So empathy, negotiation, leading a team, right? These are all skills that are really going to differentiate leaders and managers over the next 10 years. Women on average have higher social and emotional skills. But if we can build those, I think that's a huge advantage to kind of future-proof your career. So lots of actions I think we can take.
Well, I'm really seeing also something that you said in there. I mean, there's a lot that's really good, but one real subtlety is a lot of people look for a mentor, but they don't look for a sponsor. And there's a difference between a mentor and a sponsor.
There's a huge difference. And mentors share advice, but they don't change outcomes. And I'm interested in outcomes. Is there an opportunity there? Is there a new job, a promotion, a project, a way to kind of shine? Because if not, like the advice, you can get that from lots of sources, but it's not that valuable.
Yeah.
The sponsors are worth their weight in gold. And you don't need that many of them, right? I've had 1, 2 at any given time. If they are doing their job well, that's all you need.
Yeah.
But how do you find them, cultivate them, kind of keep that
Mm-hmm.
relationship strong over
Mm-hmm.
time?
Mm-hmm. How did you get so interested in this? Had you had an experience that you thought, I need to really dig into this?
I've been passionate about gender equality for ever, as long as I
Yeah.
can remember.
Yeah.
I lived in both China and Japan growing up. I'm half Chinese. And you would think, right, 2 countries in Asia, geographically pretty close, but really on different ends of the spectrum in terms of women's role in society. So
Mm-hmm.
in China, Mao is famous for saying women hold up half the sky. There's very little gender, kind of concentration in um, different occupations. And actually, they have the highest rate of female self-made billionaires in the world. And then, meanwhile, I was a senior in high school in Japan, and I knew very few women working outside of the home. And so I thought, how can this be? And what affects women's different trajectories in the workplace, in society? What are the societal things that hold women back from participating more
Mm-hmm.
fully in the workplace? So about 11, 12 years ago, started to do some of that research in power of parity and have been involved ever since from just kind of looking at the data around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And both what is the GDP impact, but what is the kind of individual
Right.
lives impacted, women impacted as we
Right.
think about both of those things in tandem.
Did you say you had three daughters? Two
I
daughters?
do, 3 daughters,
Three
12,
daughters.
9, and 9.
Okay, so how are you approaching this, knowing that this is what exists? And obviously,
Yes.
you're doing good because you're speaking out on it. You're trying to make change. But how are you parenting 3 daughters, knowing that this is the world?
I think the biggest thing is teaching them both self-confidence, earned self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
So giving them opportunities to earn that for themselves, but teaching them to advocate for themselves.
Mm,
I think
yeah.
all of the chapters talk about how you build experience capital is by advocating for yourself, right? Driving your career because nobody else can drive your career the way you can for yourself, given your values and your trade-offs. And so if they can learn to advocate for themselves, whether that's in elementary school as
Yeah.
it is right now, or high school, college, and then as they enter the workforce, I think that will be key. And then they are learning skills, right? The tech skills, the social and emotional skills. I truly believe that will help future-proof, their education, but also their career, because those are things that in 20, 30, 40 years will still need, quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Anything I didn't ask you that you want to mention?
Alita, the biggest thing that surprised me in our research
Mm-hmm.
was around women's health. And we were
Ah.
involved in some research around women's health because we all know women live longer than men, which is
Mm-hmm.
wonderful news. But we also live 25% more years in poor health. And this was really surprising to me. So, because we're living longer and in poorer health for a longer period, we spend more money on healthcare. Not a huge surprise.
Mm-hmm.
But you combine that in terms of retirement with lower average retirement savings, right? We've got the majority of part time
Right.
jobs, minority of full time jobs. We have lower average retirement savings, and we need to make that money stretch for longer. That is just a really challenging equation that often doesn't work and results in older women in poverty, but also right not taking care of their health. And so on both ends of that, I'd love to inspire people to kind of take different actions. On the retirement side, how do we make our money work for us, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about building experience capital across a career and maximizing your income. How do you make that money work for you? And women are much more likely to say, I don't know to financial questions
Mm,
or not make a decision.
mm.
And when it comes to your retirement savings and financial decisions, not making a decision is making a decision.
Yeah.
So, how do we get more educated, more involved in our retirement and save more, frankly, so there's higher readiness? And then on the other side, in terms of health, how do we take our symptoms seriously, advocate for ourselves when it comes to the health system and doctors who are well intentioned, but often trained on male symptoms. For example, a heart attack, when we see it in the movie or when doctors are trained on it, is like tightness of chest. When it manifests in women, it's actually typically feels a little bit like indigestion.
Mm.
So we tend to get misdiagnosed, completely undiagnosed. And so it results in higher death rates for women.
Mhm.
So how do we advocate for ourselves when we are feeling something? And then also save for that, longer years in poorer health.
So what do you recommend? What do you recommend of how we advocate for ourselves and then how we save so that we're ready when we're older?
I think it starts early, right? Maximizing your Roth IRA savings, getting more educated, even if it's like one category every 6 months or a
Mhm.
year,
Mhm.
right? How do you get involved in your equity investments? How do you understand your retirement and tax advantage savings? Just little by little, getting more
Mhm.
involved.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then on the health side, I think it really is take your symptoms seriously. If you're not feeling like you're getting heard by your doctor, go seek another opinion.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
are the only one that can advocate the best
Yeah.
for your own
Right.
symptoms and your own health.
Right. What I'm hearing you say across the board here is that advocate for yourself, whether it's in the
Absolutely.
workplace, it's your health, it's your finances, it's your education. Women really have to step up and advocate for themselves. It doesn't happen enough. And my question to you would be, when they do advocate for themselves, are you
Mm.
seeing results?
We see results. It is a bit mixed. For example, a few years ago in the data, we saw women start to negotiate more for themselves in terms of title, pay,
Yeah.
right? Kind of benefits.
Right.
And all of a sudden, when women started to do this, they were 3 times more likely to get feedback that they were selfish, right?
Oh,
Much more likely than
oh
men.
gosh.
And this
Oh
is
my
both from,
God.
when they're negotiating with men and women. So
Yeah.
it's not just men react poorly, women react often in very much the same ways.
Hmm.
So advocating for ourselves is half the battle.
Yeah.
And then we need to educate allies and others so that we're all more aware when we're interacting with each other of, gender differences, gaps in how people are perceived.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so much good stuff, and like you said, it is good to know so that you also know how to advocate or how to respond to what's going on or
Just
make change. Um, kind of a, I don't know if this is out there for you or if you have it in the book. I didn't get to that, but what's the responsibility of men in this?
I think men can be incredible allies. We cannot change the system reactions on our own, right? When you look at the talent pipeline, especially at senior levels,
Mm-hmm.
less than 1 in 3 people reporting to a CEO in the US is a woman. And about 1 out of 14 is a woman of color. And so if we don't have male allies and other allies helping to equalize the playing field, recognize when bias is happening, you know, help all of these more system level
Yeah.
changes, it's going to take even longer to get there. And already it's decades in the making.
Yeah. What's next for you? Is there another book? Do you feel now that
No
you've
more
written this
books.
one, you've got the,
This was the one and only. This was certainly a kind of a focus of passion and kind of a lifelong interest area. I think what's next is just sharing the insights from the book and hoping that this can help people across their career make better decisions for themselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the research. Thank you for sharing
Thank
it.
you.
It's wonderful. It's given us a lot to think about for sure.
My pleasure.